The SPM But Better. How Should We Define and Measure Poverty Today? By Elia Weber, Berkeley Milam, and Gabby Hittar.
In order to define poverty in America today, we should use a modified version of the SPM.
We will begin by outlining what the SPM is, its pros, and its limitations, then shift into solving the problems in a redesigned SPM. So what is the SPM? The SPM, or Supplemental Poverty Measure, is an additional poverty measurement used by the U.S. Census Bureau, but it is not preferred. This measurement examines the resources of households by measuring their income and then adding government non-cash benefits. This includes both in-kind benefits, like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which provides food benefits to supplement in grocery shopping, and near-cash benefits, like child tax credits. The SPM also considers non-discretionary spending and subtracts this from income. This would include expenses that are not optional, such as transportation to and from work or childcare. Another important non-discretionary expense is MOP, medical out-of-pocket expenses. So now that we know how to measure the resources of households using SPM, we need to examine the thresholds. SPM begins by examining food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, or FCSU. The SPM takes a large selection of data points and finds the median between homes that spend the most on FCSU and homes that spend the least. We then take 83% of the median and multiply it by 1.2. This is intended to add wiggle room for nicer products in some areas and spending on items outside of the necessities. The FCSU median is readjusted for the composition of the household based on whether or not people live together and pool resources. In our measurement, individuals who are in poverty are those below this threshold that we calculate using the FCSU when taking into account their benefits and income.
The pros of the SPM. The SPM has numerous benefits that other measurements of poverty do not have. One such example being that the SPM considers a large variety of factors. As previously mentioned, the SPM considers not only income, but also accounts for non-cash government benefits that an individual receives along with other extraneous expenses that may affect any given individual. Another great benefit of the SPM is that, unlike the OPM, it factors in diverse family structures. Adapting to a more modern living, the SPM has been able to calculate income regarding those who may not be blood or legally related, however provide monetary benefits or strains to the household. This is especially useful with tracking couples who live together but are not married, referred to as cohabitating couples. This aids in providing a more accurate look at a given home's financial situation and allowing for proper aid to be applied. The OPM is not designed to do this due to differing structures being uncommon when it was first created. Lastly, the SPM adjusts according to an individual's broad geographical location. The SPM recognizes that it is important to consider where someone is living in order to compare their purchasing power. SPM's limitations. While the SPM provides a strong baseline measurement as a poverty metric, it has several limitations that need to be addressed. One limitation is that the SPM fails to account for the value of financial aid related to health and medical expenses without insurance. As a result, individuals without health insurance must pay all of these costs out of pocket, reducing their overall purchasing power compared to those who receive government aid. This creates inequities across the population, drawing a divide between those with insurance or government assistance and those without, and ultimately penalizing the latter. Furthermore, the SPM does not fully capture costs of SCSU across different geographic locations, and it is especially limited when adjusting rent prices by geography, since the areas that SCSU are calculated for are very broad. Lastly, it does not consider individuals with chronic illnesses who are disproportionately impacted by the cost of additional needs. Instead, the SPM makes broad assumptions about the cost of housing, FCSU, and healthcare expenses.
With our knowledge of the SPM and its drawbacks, we can alter it. FCSU should be altered to more seriously consider cost of living differences in each area. Instead of comparing FCSU in larger areas, it should be shrunk further so as to include what rental prices are like between suburbs and a rural area, for example. One way to assist in recalculating FCSU in smaller areas would be by including fair market rental, FMR, in the measurement. By examining what amount of an individual's FCSU is spent on housing, we could then use the FMR from different areas and adjust to a new location. If we have little data on the cost of FCSU in Blacksburg, Virginia, but we have a lot of data on the cost of FCSU in Danville, Virginia, we can section off the amount of money spent on housing at the median and replace it with the FMR. This would allow for more fair purchasing power comparisons between people who pay for the cost of rent in Blacksburg, Virginia, versus Danville, Virginia. The cost of food can also vary wildly across the United States, with the transportation costs for fresh produce making a large difference. Shrinking the areas in which FCSU is calculated would minimize the distortion. Additional consideration should also be given for households being measured by the SPM that contain individuals who have medical conditions that require certain goods. If an individual in a household needs a particular diet due to a condition, and those foods are more costly, their FCSU would be higher. An additional cost should be averaged for special diets, housing accommodations for those with disabilities, equipment that is needed for recovery but not covered under insurance, and other needs. This should be considered as part of the subtracted involuntary costs. Unfortunately, the issue of people who do not have insurance and will thus have worse health outcomes is difficult to form a solution to. This is a problem with all measurements of poverty, and we thus do not believe that this impacts the need to use the redesigned SPM. The capabilities approach. The capabilities approach is a theoretical framework for defining and measuring poverty, first introduced by the economist-philosopher Amartya Sen in 1979. It was developed with flexibility and universal applicability in mind, assessing individual well-being, social circumstances, and access to opportunities through two major measures, functionings and capabilities. Sen defines functionings as the actual beings and doings a person achieves, while capabilities are the beings and doings a person could achieve if they chose to. For example, a capability would be having the physical ability to eat and food available, while the functioning would be the act of eating. It is important to differentiate because someone may have the ability to eat but choose not to. Conversely, someone may lack the capability to eat because they do not have access to food. By capturing people's abilities, not just their income, contentment, or access to resources, we gain a clear understanding of where individuals are falling short and can better address the root of the issue, while still respecting the dignity of choice and personal agency that the capabilities approach prioritizes. Ultimately, while the capabilities approach is heavily philosophy-based and provides more of a picture of what an ideal skill to measure poverty would look like, it is important to note that the modified version of the SPM takes this theoretical framework and applies it to an implementable plan. For instance, one capability on Martha Nussbaum's list is that of bodily health, which includes adequate nourishment and shelter. This can be quantified through the SPM's focus on access to FCSU. Using this as a proxy, the plan can generate accurate data and measurable trends, which in turn can inform new policies and address poverty at its root while still maintaining the dignity of all.
Rector's argument in his article, Air Conditioning, Cable TV, and an Xbox, What is Poverty in the United States Today, is based on perceived inaccuracies in the U.S. poverty measurement, the official poverty measure, the OPM. The OPM seems to show that the levels of poverty within America have stayed virtually unchanged. In the past few decades, many advancements have occurred allowing for a higher standing of living within America today. Rector views this as proof that fewer people are in abject poverty. However, the ways Rector undermines the state of poverty in America today inaccurately reflect its severity. Rector's primary argument is built on two main points. 1. Americans are doing better today than they were in decades. And 2. The state of American poverty is over-dramatized. To his first point, Rector reiterates that the average impoverished person owns items that the middle class from decades ago would not have been able to afford. Quote, today, most poor families have conveniences that were unavailable to the middle class not too long ago. However, what Rector fails to acknowledge is a change of what are necessities over time. A primary example is cell phones. While even wealthy men at one point did not all own cell phones, phone culture was not as normative nor as persistent as it is now. Phones have changed from a luxury to a necessity. Secondly, Rector argues that the average impoverished American has the same standard of living as a typical European. Quote, the typical poor American had more living space than the average European. Rector dismisses the difference in overall day-to-day living between the U.S. and Europe. While to a typical European, having a car is a luxury, it is a necessity for Americans due to our differences in access to public transportation and less walkable cities. Overall, Rector's material approach towards poverty measurement is entirely biased against impoverished Americans who do not fall within his narrow view of poverty. The SPM seeks a much more encompassing approach, factoring in measurements beyond material goods.
Alternate poverty measures. While there are many other measurements for poverty, our modified SPM is still the best option. A measurement used in many affluent countries is the Relative Poverty Measure, or RPM. The RPM looks at income in a region, finds the median, and then designates those who make anything under half of median income to be impoverished. The RPM has never been adopted by the United States because it is relative, and the U.S. Census Bureau wanted a measurement that was not impacted by others' wealth, but instead on how much individuals are able to afford in a vacuum. Because of how relative this measurement is, it may not show everyone who is in poverty, and does not consider what life is like for those in that designation. Modified SPM, which considers multiple factors to ascertain whether or not households can afford what they need, is a much better measurement for poverty. The official poverty measurement, OPM, is the preferred method of poverty measurement by the U.S. Census Bureau. Originally founded in 1969 by Molly Orshansky, the OPM has remained the official method in the United States ever since. Though its longevity in theory helps aid in seeing trends of poverty in America, its inability to adapt to modern living habits and standards has made it unable to give an accurate reflection. The SPM, on the other hand, has adapted to modern living by updating its definitions for what it considers a family, extending beyond legal or blood definitions. Additionally, the SPM includes non-cash government methods that the OPM is unable to account for due to the fact that they did not exist when the OPM was initially enacted.
In this video, we discuss what the SPM is. The SPM is a poverty measure that considers resources and circumstances beyond income. We then moved into the SPM's pros, some notable being that the SPM includes diverse family structures, accounts for non-cash government benefits, and adjusts according to broad geographical location. We then found cons of the SPM that we revised in our modified version. The capabilities approach was considered in our modified SPM. The capabilities approach is a theoretical framework for defining and measuring poverty. We acknowledge and debunked Rector's argument about poverty, as well as other inferior poverty measures. All of this comes together to support our thesis that in order to define poverty in America today, we should use a modified version of the SPM.
Bye, and thank you for watching.